Today I'm speaking with Barbara Bogatin. Barbara has been a member of the San Francisco Symphony since 1994. She began her cello studies at the New School of Music in Philadelphia, continued at San Francisco Conservatory of Music Prep Division, and earned her Bachelor and Master of Music degrees from the Juilliard School in New York. Before joining the San Francisco Symphony, she played with the New York Chamber Soloists, New York Philharmonic, Metropolitan Opera, Casals Festival, and was principal cellist with Milwaukee and New Jersey Symphony Orchestras. She's performed on and recorded on Baroque cello and viola da gamba with Aston Magna, the Amati Trio, Connecticut Early Music Festival, and New York's Classical Band. As a chamber musician, she's played with Chamber Music Northwest, Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center, Tiburon, Chamber Players, San Francisco Symphony Davies Hall, Chamber Music Series, Classical Tahoe Music Festival, and on cruise ships throughout the Baltic Sea and the Middle East, dream gig. Along with her husband, neuroscientist Clifford Sarin, she has led workshops on meditation and music practice at Spirit Rock Meditation Center, the Esalen Institute, Stanford Symposium for Music and the Brain, Telluride Compassion Festival, Institute for Mindfulness South Africa Conference, and the Ecology of Mind and Matter Symposium in Todi, Italy. And on top of all that, she is a proud mother of 2 University of California graduates. Barbara, welcome to this podcast, and I think it's a simplification to say that you are ridiculously accomplished.
Thank you. That's so much. Thank you very much.
So one of the things that I was really fascinated about in our conversations we've had as friends is your familiarity and your kind of, not exactly lifelong, but decades-long experience with meditation. And what drew you to that?
Oh, that's a great question. And it has a long and sort of convoluted answer. So I guess it makes sense to start at the beginning, because I didn't come to meditation or really know anything about it until I was in my 30s, and my career was fairly well started at that point. But I'll tell you a little bit about my career up to that point, so you can sort of see how I was ripe for the types of things that meditation provided. So you read my bio so extensively. I started cello, as many of us did, quite young. I was 8 years old. And I actually started in the public schools in Philadelphia. I was in a very kind of old-fashioned, inner-city, dilapidated public school that really had nothing was especially good about the school. The textbooks were falling apart. The teachers were not very engaged. Classes were overcrowded. It was very underfunded. But the one thing it had was a great music program with free lessons and free instruments for anybody who wanted, starting in the 3rd grade.
Wow, free lessons, so actually private time with the teacher.
Yeah, and
amazing.
There wasn't, I would say, there wasn't one child in that school, including myself, who ever would have studied an instrument had it not been free at the school with instruments provided. Mm-hmm. And so when it came time in the 3rd grade, if you wanted to choose an instrument, I had heard a string quartet come to my school, and I thought, well, it'd be fun to play one of those instruments. That sounded kind of cool. So I said I'd play cello or violin. I probably didn't know there was even a viola in the group. And then when they were giving out the instruments, and they got to me and said, well, we've given out the violins, so we're going to give you your second choice, the cello. And I said, okay. So I took the cello home, and little by little, I started practicing it and taking my lessons at the school. And there was a wonderful orchestra, school orchestra, and actually our conductor was a woman who was a very, as I didn't know at the time, but later I learned, a very renowned bassoonist and pedagogue, Shirley Curtis. She was married to a member of the Philadelphia Orchestra who would often come to our elementary school concerts.
Yeah, wow.
Now that's devotion. And I learned a couple of things, actually 2 important things very early when I started playing the cello at age 8. The first was that if I practiced a little bit every day, I got better very quickly. And the second thing was that when I got better and played for people, I got a lot of praise. And everybody was telling me how talented I was and what a wonderful cellist I was, and I had a big future. And that inspired me to practice more. And then I'd get a little better, and then I'd have to play at the school assemblies, a little solo. And then the component of fear came into it as well to make me practice, because I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of the whole school.
Right.
So between learning pieces that I liked, getting the praise, and then fear of not playing well in public, that carried me a long way toward practicing in my early years. And in fact, I would say probably throughout my entire career, those three elements were very important in the inspiration of practicing. So when I was around 12, my family moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. And then I started private lessons at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music and joined a youth orchestra and did all of the things that young people do in their local towns, to competitions and little recitals and concertos whenever possible. And when it came time for college, I went to Juilliard, got a scholarship to Juilliard. And when I got there, what happened to me happens to many people when they're the big stars in their hometown, and then they go to a much bigger environment. And I was competing against the best cellists from all around the world. And suddenly nobody was telling me how talented I was and what a big future I had and what a great
So there was a
cellist.
brief interlude where you weren't getting the kind of
more
feedback
than
you're
a
accustomed
brief.
to.
There was a big interlude. And I was very intimidated by the level of talent that I saw all around me.
Yeah.
Just as one example, when I would go for my lessons, there was a kid who had his lesson at the same time in the next studio who would be practicing standing up in front of the door. And he sounded so good. And I thought, how could that kid, just standing up without even paying attention, sound so good? And he grew up to be Yo-Yo Ma. And this is the kind of talent that there was at the school at the time. So with people like Yo-Yo Ma in the next room practicing,
Yeah.
and the members of the Emerson String Quartet at school when I was.
I mean that was very motivating, I'm sure. Or was that more like the fear factor?
I think that was the fear factor.
So
and
it was
I think
uncomfortable to be surrounded with that kind of talent.
It was
and
very difficult. I would
fluency,
say
yeah.
my first 4 years at Juilliard were just sort of desperate, trying to practice enough. I never felt like I could practice enough. Like
Yeah.
the standards were so high that I felt very intimidated. I would say my last couple of years, I was there for 6 years, and my last 2 years I formed a string quartet with some colleagues that started to have a little bit of success, and I thought maybe I could play string quartets, and that's something that I would really love to do. But I still felt like I was always rushing to catch up, trying to practice enough, trying to figure out how to practice well. And then when I got out of Juilliard, I kind of fell into freelancing. So I was doing just everything that one can possibly do, from Broadway shows to cruise ships to school concerts, pits of ballet companies, subbed at the opera, many different things. Played Baroque cello, viola da gamba in different groups. And there was always more things I had to practice for, and never enough time. And I remember feeling so stressed by not just the logistics of getting around to New York and trying to get jobs and trying to build my career, but also just the sheer volume of music I had to learn, and the standards that I wanted to rise up to, and the inadequacies I felt, and just the stress of trying to squeeze in practicing. And I really thought a lot about practice. How can I be efficient? How can I use my time well? What is it to practice? What things do I need to think about and focus on? So this was an ongoing struggle, and also education. I was trying to figure out, how do I practice, and coaching with different people, and how do I improve? How do I keep the level going up in the middle of running around and trying to do everything that I possibly could to better my career and work on my playing at the same time. So I would say, I mean, even thinking about it and talking about it, my heart's beating faster, my voice is going faster, because I was always in this mode of go mode in New York, and the stress of trying to do everything and not having enough time for it was sort of the opposite of a feeling of spaciousness. And then throwing into the mix, I wanted to have a personal life and have good relationships with people, and so I was starting to try to date people outside of music And a friend of mine who knew that I was really interested in meeting some people in other fields said, I think you might like this friend that I just met at a party named Cliff. And so she set us up on a blind date. And when I do some seminars at music schools these days, I have to explain that was what my generation did. Instead of Tinder and online datings, we had blind dates. And so your friend would say, why don't you go out with so-and-so? I think you might like each other. And you'd exchange telephone numbers, and then they'd call you on the actual phone and arrange a date.
That's good to kind of do an archaeological survey about how dating used to go. That's very helpful. Thank you, Barbara.
So I met this guy named Cliff who was a neuroscientist, and I wouldn't even say that I knew what a neuroscientist was at the time, but I learned very quickly. It's someone who studies the human brain and the mind, but not from the inside by operating into the brain, but from the outside by putting an electrode cap on your head and looking at the electrical activity that's going on from one part of the brain to another. And so Cliff was very interested in how the brain works, how the mind works, human consciousness, how we think about ourselves and our bodies and the integration of mind and body. And one thing that he had done since he had been in college was meditation retreats. And he had gone on Buddhist meditation retreats for a particular kind of meditation called vipassana. And when we first started dating, he was telling me about these retreats and trying to convince me to come on a meditation retreat with him.
Wow, so this goes right back to the very beginning of your relationship with your husband. Cliff.
Yes, probably the first blind date, in fact, when he told me about it. And when his interest was kind of because of his curiosity about the brain, or was it the meditation that took him into neuroscience? It was, I think he always was interested in the brain and the mind and alternative ways of understanding ourselves and non-Western approaches, and had tremendously curious about different modalities and mind-body connections. And when he did Vipassana retreats, he very much resonated with the Buddhist teaching and what he learned from himself about meditation. He actually has a wonderful TEDx talk about how he came to meditation, which he, when he was very young, he was asthmatic and spent a lot of time just following his breath and being grateful for his breath.
Wow.
And then when he started doing meditation, that brought him back to his early childhood. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
So it's not
something like that was in retrospect a kind of a gift to get him to slow down and to
in some ways it was
be aware of how the mind was really controlling the body, or at least the symbiosis of the two.
Well, when he first told me about these meditation retreats that he wanted me to go with him, it's not that I just jumped right on the idea by any means. I said, well, what would we do at this meditation retreat? And he said, well, we'll go for about 10 days to this Buddhist monastery, which is out in the middle of the woods, and we'll spend 8 to 10 hours a day sitting on a little cushion on the floor in silence. And then every couple of hours, we'll get up and walk around across the floor very, 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 very slowly back and forth across the floor. And then we'll sit down on the cushion again for a few more hours. And we'll be in silence the whole 10 days. He said, don't worry, you'll get 3 meals a day, but they'll all be in silence, and you'll sleep in a little dorm room. You won't speak to anybody. No one will talk to you. And then every evening, the teachers will give a talk about the Buddha philosophy and Buddha's teachings. And when he told me this is what he wanted to do for our winter vacation, I said, you have got to be kidding. There is no way I'm going to do that. It sounded boring and difficult and not fun. But he's a very persuasive guy, and over several years, he wore down my resistance. And finally, I agreed to do one of these retreats, and I was very trepidatious, but I started to trust him, and I thought, well, if he thinks it's such a valuable thing, I'll give it a try. Up to that point, I really knew nothing about meditation. I had no relationship to it, and you're probably old enough as I am to remember the days before airport security, when just anybody could go into an airport. And they used to have at airports, I'm not sure why, but the Hare Krishna cult groups would always come to airports wearing their orange robes and singing, chanting, and trying to convince the passerbys with their luggage rolling by to come and join their cult. And that's what I thought of for meditation. So I was very surprised to see no Hare Krishnas and no orange robes when we got to this meditation retreat. So I really didn't know what I was in for. But I went, and probably was not such a great idea to just jump right into this without some prior meditation experience.
I was going to say, I mean, what was your first experience one of those multi-day things?
It was.
it really? Yeah.
It was a 10-day retreat.
Wow, that is trial by fire, isn't it? I mean, that must have been challenging.
It was more than challenging, yeah. And it was all the things that I was afraid of. It was difficult. At times it was boring. At times it was not pleasant. Mm-hmm. But it was also transformative in many ways. And after a couple of days, when I started to kind of calm down a bit and stop being in such a rush because there was no place to go and nothing to do, I noticed something very surprising to me, which was that a lot of the things that the teachers were saying, such as listen deeply to the sounds around you and pay attention to the internal sensations in your body. And during the walking meditation, they talked about being very aware of the motions of your body and the intention to move a part of the body. Is there relaxation? Is there tension? How do the different parts of the body connect as you're walking? And paying attention to where my mind goes, gently bringing it back when it wanders, and staying present in a non-judgmental, neutral awareness of whatever is there. And then I thought, this sounds a lot like what I do when I try to practice the cello. When I'm having a really good practice session, listening deeply to the sounds, very deep awareness of the internal sensations of my body that as I'm moving my arms, staying present with the breath, and staying present with the sounds that I'm making in a neutral way, in a discerning. They talk about discerning wisdom in Buddhism. So being very present and at the same time accepting wherever you are, there you are. Sometimes when we're practicing, we are really playing well and we're feeling great, and then the next day that ease is gone. And where was that passage? I just was able to do it. Yeah. And when you develop a kind of neutrality and acceptance, you're not critiquing yourself. It's what they call the second arrow. You can critique yourself in terms of, I was flat, I was sharp, that sound wasn't beautiful, it was too pressed, I wasn't making the dynamics accurately. But
this is a huge kind of obstacle for so many of us because, of course, in order to develop, we have to evaluate our performance constantly, right? So
all the time,
and yet that's not really where music comes from. It's where our skill as players may evolve from, but it has nothing to do with performing or actually where music comes from.
Yeah.
And you were able to make that connection even in that first meditation retreat, that there was a connection between this quality of acceptance and a kind of a calmness to it and deep listening that you could relate to your playing. But tell me about dealing with that kind of sense of evaluation. And how can we do that? How can we facilitate that? What I think is sometimes a very, very short bridge from our evaluative mindset to this kind of deeper sourcing of music.
Yeah, that's such an important point that you make, because we often, as we're playing, have this critical voice in our head telling us what we're doing wrong. Oh, you missed that. Oh, that wasn't good. This isn't right.
That's just our brain doing what it's supposed to do, for us musicians. However, ... Go ahead, take it from there.
However, when you practice quieting that critical mind and quieting the voices, whatever they are in your head, and developing or cultivating this internal space of calm, an internal space of connection. That's the space that I like to be in when I'm performing. And so when I talk about some of the things that I learned from meditation over time, so just to backtrack, at the end of that retreat, I really felt like I couldn't even articulate how much I had learned and on what levels. But I wound up, one of the things that my boyfriend at the time, Cliff Sarin, noticed, is that after the retreat, when I'd walk by your practice room, well, before the retreat, there was always a lot of swearing he'd hear. Damn! I'd play something and be just out loud swearing, obviously at myself and at my inability to do it. He said, after the retreat, no more swearing. So this was
it was that fast. I mean, it was
certain things were very fast.
Effect. Yeah.
Certain things absolutely did, because I've noticed even in practice, and probably you've experienced this as well, when you have an insight, a sudden insight, or maybe not so sudden, but any kind of an insight about, oh, this is what it means I'm pressing my sound, and if I just lighten up, I hear much more resonance. Once you have that insight, there's sort of no going back. You are reminded every time you hear that pressing sound, that how to make it more resonant. And so some things in this vipassana, it's often translated as insight meditation. And when you have an insight, that just transforms instantly, because you see things differently. I had so many insights, even not related to the cello. One of the things was I had this idea, and I didn't even realize it, but I always had an idea. I wanted to do things my way. It might not be what is the best way, but I want to do it my way, and I was very stubborn about a lot of things. And somehow at the retreat, and I'm not sure if it was because the environment was so separated from my normal environment, but I had the insight that I don't have to do things my way. That maybe my way isn't the best way. And even in small things, like on my answering machine at home, I had, we would, this is also from the olden days before cell phones, you had an answering machine at home, and you'd put a little message on, please leave a message, and I had my message included myself playing the cello, of course, some beautiful piece that I was showing off. And people even had said to me, I can't even hear your voice on the answering machine, the cello is so loud. But I thought, no, I'm going to show off how well I play the cello on my answering machine. And as soon as I got home, the first thing I did was change my message. Because the stubbornness of doing it my way, I just had this insight, not always the best way. And I think that started to play out in so many different ways. So one of the insights that I had was this internal voice of criticism of myself while I'm practicing. That gets in my way. That stops me from really listening deeply and just being accepting of whatever is going on, however I sound. And so that was what instantly changed. No more swearing at the practicing. One small thing. And also the idea of...
go ahead.
It
sounds like a small thing, but it's actually a huge thing, because your whole kind of emotional response to what you were in the middle of was calming down. You were observing it rather than trying to control it so much.
And the other thing about the retreat, you're slowing down your thought processes to the point where you're observing where your mind goes. Because if you're sitting there just staying with your breath, of course your mind wanders. That's what minds do. And you start to notice, you're given instructions, notice where your mind goes. Is it future thought? Is it a past thought? Is it what emotions are coming up? You have a thought and then anger arises. Is it anger? Maybe there's regret or grief underneath that anger. And the longer you spend with this process of examination, of awareness, the deeper you can go into your internal processes and notice where your mind goes. And then when you bring it back, notice how quickly or slowly it takes you to get back into a calm space. And I found when I could really find my calm center and feel it deeply in my body, I thought to myself, this is the space I want to be in when I walk out on stage.
Mm.
And so with practice, because I then developed a meditation practice on an ongoing basis in my own life, and I've done many meditation retreats since that first one, which was 35 years ago or so. I always am reminded how calming it is to get into that quiet internal space. And when you can practice that and conjure it up before a concert. I mean, I used to, before meditation retreats, my normal stance before walking out on stage, whatever it was, I'm not talking about an orchestra now, I'm talking about a solo or a chamber music when you know you're really going to be heard. I'd be backstage practicing the fast passages as fast as I could, over and over again, the hardest passages, over and over again, just to, I guess, make sure I could still do them.
Right, to bolster your confidence that it was still there. You got the stuff.
And then I'd walk out on stage. That's not the best mind state and body state to share my love of music with the audience. And so what I discovered was if I'm backstage, getting into a very calm space, feeling my calm center, and a certain type of meditation called metta, when we repeat certain phrases to ourselves. Some of them might be, may I be peaceful, may I be happy, may I be free from suffering. And
a kind of mantra.
Sort of, yeah, like a mantra.
But it's called metta.
Metta, M-E-T-T-A, metta, which means loving kindness meditation. And when you do a metta retreat, I've done them where you'll spend a whole week of basically, when you're in your meditation space, repeating certain phrases. First, towards yourself, may I be peaceful, may I be happy. Many other phrases, may I feel safe and protected. And then you'll do it towards another person, a loved one, and then perhaps towards a neutral person, and then when you're really advanced, towards a difficult person. And it doesn't affect, if I sit and do some metta looking at you, Eugene, may you be peaceful, may you be happy, may you be free from suffering. It doesn't affect you, because you don't know that this is going on in my mind, but it affects me. And it affects my relationship with other people, with you, with people who I might have a difficult relationship with myself. And it's a way of expressing good wishes and goodwill. And one of my favorite meditation teachers, gurus, friends, Sylvia Boorstein, had a great phrase that she would say as part of the metta meditation, and it was, may I greet every moment fully. May I greet it as a friend. And when I did that practice, I thought, this is a great thing to say before I walk out on stage. So now if I have a difficult solo or some place that I'm going to be very exposed, and even if I'm feeling still insecure about all the passages, I'm not going to be practicing them frantically backstage. I'm going to be getting into this space, finding my calm center and thinking, feeling, may I greet every moment fully. May I greet it as a friend. And that's a good way to go out and share my love of music with the audience. And
what a wonderful suggestion, and that's a real gift to this whole community to hear that. Thank you for that. And this is something that can be cultivated and has to be practiced.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, you clearly are enormously gifted, Barbara, that you were able to go as your first meditation experience into a 10-day hot seat like that and learn so much from it. And the takeaway, but bring those insights into your performance life still must have taken some quality of repetition and practice.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I would say that having a daily practice, even for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, makes a huge difference. And I know that now there are so many apps. Everybody uses apps. There's so many different, most of us have on our Apple phones an app called Calm, which is about meditation. And there's one called Headspace that a lot of people use. There's another one, Healthy Minds. There's one called Buddhaful. Cute little pun. You could do it on an app. There's so much online materials. One of the places that I have attended retreats quite a bit is a place called Spirit Rock Meditation Center near where I live in Marin County in California. And spiritrock.org has their website, lots and lots of online materials, meditations, Dharma talks, how to get started with Vipassana meditation. There's so many, and not just that one, there are many, many online materials.
Right, and that's really the point, is that even though this has a tremendous impact on us as performers and as creators, the point is to begin this away from our instruments, to begin it away from whatever creative crucible we may be faced with, but to really develop a time in our day when we can connect with this deep sense of calm and really sourcing a kind of love that we all can. We have this as a kind of right, as a kind of trait of being a human being. We have the access to this beautiful source.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to try to dive a little bit deeper into exactly how we can take this amazing, judgmental state that we get into as great practicers and as great students, and can we practice that at home? Can we practice getting into sourcing this kind of deeper quality of calm and inspiration? Really, I don't think that's too strong a word.
Yeah, no. Oh, absolutely. And I think you made a really excellent point. We have to practice it at home. It just doesn't show up when we walk out on stage. It's the same as, practicing those runs. They're not going to magically appear perfectly coordinated when we walk on stage. You have to practice them, and you have to start by, as we all know, slowing them down. And so we slow down our minds, and we see where our minds are going, and then we bring them back to a calm space. There are many, I always recommend to people, if possible, to go with a live human teacher to start learning meditation. There are so many meditation centers around the country now. The one where I did my first meditation retreat is actually in Western Massachusetts, in Barre, Massachusetts, called Insight Meditation Center. And if you have access to some place like that around in the New York area, there's so many places that one can go.
And a growing number of places, thank goodness. This is incredible.
Yeah. But even if you go to an online source, which is also very valid, and you could, it's like seeing somebody. We're all used to doing Zoom calls and looking at online materials. It's like seeing a teacher right in person to a large degree.
I always think that we are so fortunate in music that we have this kind of tradition of one-on-one mentorship.
Yeah.
Because there's so much that's transmitted from person to person that goes beyond speech, really. There's something kind of in the air that we absorb from the attitude we model. We absorb so much from a one-on-one teacher like that. So the same thing with the meditation teacher is what you're suggesting.
And, I don't want to make it seem like you have to put your life on hold and go on a meditation retreat in some isolated Buddhist monastery. When I teach seminars to music students, I suggest something very simple. Before you start your practice, and I know that it's hard to find enough time to practice when you're a conservatory student, but let's say you have 40 minutes that you're going to practice in a little segment between classes. Take the first 5 minutes before you start, and even before you pick up your instrument, and just settle into your body. It helps if you close your eyes, because then when we cut off stimulation to the visual system, our other senses become more acute. And just spend a few minutes listening to the sounds that you hear and noticing what they are. And then bringing your attention from the external to the internal world, and just settling in your body and noticing if there's any place in your body that's holding tension, and if you can relax into that. Then notice your breath. Is it shallow? Is it deep? Is it fast? Is it slow? And stay present following that breath for 5 or 10 breaths. And when your mind wanders, which it will, we all do, All of our minds do.
It's what the brain is designed to do, is to constantly scan the horizon, right?
Yeah. So then just gently bring it back to the breath, to a specific focus. And our breath is something that's always there. We do it 20,000 times a day without mostly conscious awareness at all. And just bring your attention to it. And spending many hours with my breath
Excuse me.
Sure. I still notice new things about my breathing, even after all these hours. There's always more.
Sorry, Barbara, hold on.
Quite okay.
This is why we had to reschedule a month ago, remember?
Do you have an asthma inhaler? Would help with that? No?
No, I don't. That was just a cough drop and some water. Well, at least we're recording this. This would be good to have this in the archives. I can show it to my doctor.
Sounds like you might need a bronchodilator, like a little... I know the asthma world very well from my husband.
This is unusual. I think it's because I'm trying to build up my strength, so I'm doing more of a workout every day.
Oh.
And then I've had a busy morning too, so I think this is just a little bit overuse going on. But pardon me.
Okay.
Obviously all editable, but sorry to interrupt the flow of our chat.
No problem. That's fine.
Maybe I'll ask another question.
Okay.
We were just talking about devoting the first few minutes of our practice time into finding a sense of calm and real connection with our physicality, our breathing. And then when we begin to play, do you find that it's a natural kind of different perception you have for your instrument, or do you have to keep reminding yourself to go deep and to change your kind of listening in a way?
When I do a meditation before, and many students have told me that this is the same for them, even 10 minutes before the practice makes a huge difference in our listening and our listening awareness. And over time, when I tried to really slow down my thought processes and figure out how do I practice the most efficient way. Now, just in terms of technical practice, to backtrack for a minute, not so much about getting into the connection with the music, but when I'm trying to improve a passage, let's say, I realized that I broke practice down into 4 components. And I personally think this is the way most musicians practice, even if we're not aware of it. So if you're really slowing down your practice process, the first component is awareness and observation, basically. How am I playing? What am I doing? How am I using my body? And my relationship to the instrument and my body. And then the next component is analysis. What am I doing that's holding me back? What could I do differently? How am I preventing myself from getting the most beautiful sound? And then the next component is alteration, making a change. And sometimes there's trial and error. If I play with my bow this way, do I get a better sound? If I have less pressure, more pressure, different placement, the experimentation. And then once I've figured out something that's going to sound better and improve what I'm trying to do, then there's the repetition with awareness, repeating the new way. So this is a little loop of observation, analysis, alteration, repetition.
Yeah, and that's fantastically helpful. And what I notice is that 2 of the 4, are just observational.
Yes, yes. Yeah. I mean, observation and analysis are so closely related. And we keep doing this loop, observing, listening, analyzing, changing, repeating. And it happens so quickly. It happens sometimes in a second. If you're working on one passage, the more acute you are aware of what you're doing, the more quickly you can adjust and repeat the new way. But when we're learning, or when I'm teaching students, sometimes you have to really slow down and notice the exact bow change. Are you pressing too much? Can you give yourself the instruction on the up bow? Don't press with the wrist. Release the shoulder. And then when you slow it down enough to really make those changes in slow motion, you can practice the new way of doing it. And then another thing that my wonderful teacher Sylvia Burstein used to say is each moment of conscious awareness erases a moment of conditioned response. And if you unpack that, each time you make that bow change smoothly with a relaxed wrist, that erases all another time that you played with a tight wrist and not a smooth bow change. Each time you make that beautiful resonant sound, you're training, you're habituating yourself, and kind of erasing all the times when you had a pressed and tight sound.
I love that. That is such a positive frame to that.
It's not really each moment erases one moment, but once you have the insight and start playing differently with awareness, then that's how we raise our level. That's how we keep improving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And so today, I mean, this has become a habit for you. This is a part of your daily practice away from the cello, and it's also a practice when you come to the cello.
I find
same thing in rehearsals.
There's no substitute for careful listening and repetition of the way that you want to sound. There's no substitute for practice, continuous practice. I wish it were the case that I didn't still have to practice.
I know, that's such bad news.
It's terrible.
I'm sure I'm going to edit this part out.
Listen, sometimes when I've given public talks to non-musicians, somebody will say, look, you've been playing that thing for more than 50 years. You still have to practice it? Why is that? And I say, if I didn't practice the cello, if I didn't touch a cello, say, for 10 years, and then I picked it up, I could still play it. And I'd probably be, the best cellist in my book group. But to play at the level that I need to maintain the standards of my orchestra job with the San Francisco Symphony, or to present myself in public all by myself, I really do need to still practice. And I'm glad that I know how to slow down my emotions and slow down my physical acts of practicing and listen very deeply to make the continuous changes that I still need to do to sound the way I would like to sound. Not that I do sound the way I'd like to sound, but I'm still aspiring to sound better, for sure.
Well, that's an interesting comment, because so much of what we talked about is this quality of acceptance. So, I mean, can you accept the way that you sound?
Wow.
Or is it because you have a concept of sound that you're going for that is still a work in progress?
Yes, that's a beautiful question, and it's very related to Buddhist teachings and to the practice and path of mindfulness. So I think that both things can be true, and it's a sort of a conundrum for all of us. I'm not satisfied with the way that I sound, but I have to accept it in order to believe in it and play from my heart and feel like I can express the music. So even though it's not my ideal sound, and I've talked to many, many people about this, including Yo-Yo Ma, who still will critique himself and wish he could sound better. So it's not that we reach a level and then, oh great, now I'm fine. I never have to think about that again. But both things can be true at the same time. You can accept how you sound and appreciate the joy of the music that you're trying to express, and still wish that you sounded better or have a sound in your imagination that is even more beautiful than you're currently able to do. And we all make mistakes, and we all play in public less than our absolute best, and yet there has to be just an acceptance and an awareness that what we're after is expressing the music. And I think about, I want to share my joy in music when I play, and if I can get into that space, and before I play, get myself into the space of connection, human emotion, connecting my own. This is another thing that what we cultivate in meditation is so helpful for connecting to the emotions in the music. When I do a metta practice, say, and I've done this with students where somebody will play a piece that's a very emotional piece, and you feel like, something is missing, it's not quite there, it's not quite connecting with that person's emotion. And I'll have them put the instrument down and just spend a few moments wishing, conjuring up the image of someone that they love, a parent, a grandparent, it could be even a pet, and wishing them well-being, and wishing them happiness, and wishing them peace. And then from that space of wishing compassion, pick up your instrument and just play out of that space. And the difference is so enormous in terms of the expression and the connection to the emotion in the music. And that's the space that we would like to be in. When you're in that space, you're not worrying about, was this flat, was it this sharp, did I miss a note here? You are just connecting with the emotion in the music, and and that's what people will respond to.
Yeah, love being our kind of deepest source for music. It was for Mozart, and I think most creators feel that way. That there was a great quote by Leonard Cohen, said, "If I knew where these songs came from, I would spend more time there." And maybe this is the space that we're talking about, this space of love, and for us performers, it's also a desire to communicate this somehow, to project this, extend it outwards.
And inspiration. It's a place of inspiration.
Yeah, in other words, having a motivation that is outside yourself in a way. It comes from a deeper source as well. Oh. Well, we've talked about practicing and preparing for performances. How has your meditation practice changed the way you feel after a performance? I mean, you talk about, that we can't always achieve everything that we intend to in a performance. So I would think that having an attitude of acceptance would also help you to enjoy yourself after a concert.
Yes, it definitely does. In fact, one of the things that I'll often say when someone asks me, well, how'd the concert go? I'll say, well, It could have gone a lot worse. And there's an acceptance in that I was able to express things that were important to me. Maybe some people in the audience got that emotional connection, and rarely is it perfect, but it's very much at this point about what I'm able to feel while I'm performing, and what I feel that I'm able to get to come across to the audience, connecting with the audience, and wishing well to the audience as well. I coach people often for auditions, people who take orchestral auditions, which is one of the most stressful and difficult moments in our careers, to try to play our best. And you are playing sometimes the first round, you probably know, for 10 minutes or at the most 15 minutes, and it's little snippets of different excerpts, and you're being judged against dozens and dozens of other people. And how do you get beyond the fear and the trepidation and the worry and the stress of, what if I don't get it? What if this happens? My whole life is on the line in these 10 minutes, and no one can play well in that space. You have to get out of that space, and meditation is so helpful in that respect. It's because everybody's going to make mistakes at auditions, and you want to give the audience or the committee a reason to forgive your mistakes. And if you really touch them, and if you communicate something deep about the music, they will forgive those mistakes. And I guarantee you, because I've sat on so many audition committees, and everybody's going to have little things that don't go perfectly. But the person who really makes a musical statement, and you feel the emotion, that's the person that you want, and that's the person that, in spite of their mistakes, still is playing with a full commitment and a full emotional expansiveness. That will be impressive. And so when I coach students, I tell them before each excerpt, where do you want to put your mind? And for some of them, if it's a melodic thing or something that it gives you a chance to really sing on your instrument, where do you want to put your heart? And maybe it's a moment of deep introspection, and you can practice before the audition, when you're home practicing, before you play that excerpt, practice getting into a space of whatever emotion you feel you want to express, whether it's grief, whether it's sadness, whether it's confusion. Imagine a specific scene, something that you can visualize, that conjures up that particular emotion for you. And
so it's like having a kind of a logo, or almost like an internal graphic.
Totally.
For how to access this emotional space that you want to come from.
Exactly. Access is the word. To access that deep space that is going to communicate whatever it is you think the composer's trying to express. And if you practice for each excerpt, each little snippet of 12 or 15 seconds, getting yourself into that space and then playing from that space, you have a much better chance of connecting with the listener than if you're thinking about, okay, this run and this tempo and this passage work. Sometimes you have to if it's just a technical piece that just goes really quickly and fast. You don't have time to imagine sitting with a grieving relative. It might not be the most appropriate image. But whatever it is that's going to help you, play that little excerpt. Find that space in your practice room and put yourself there before each excerpt so that you have your planning. There's so many things you can't control at an audition, but you can control where you put your mind and where you put your heart. And that's part of the practice at home, so that when you come to the audition, it takes away the critical mind and the pressure that we put on ourselves. And it's like, no, I don't have to worry about if they like it, if they don't, what happens. I just have to get into my space. It's about me sharing my music with the audience.
That is such a fantastic point. And you know, that is so rarely talked about in the academy. We don't talk about how to really get into those internal spaces enough.
Yeah.
I mean, did you have a teacher who helped you to kind of find and articulate some of those spaces?
Interestingly, when I was in my auditioning days, and before I won my audition at the San Francisco Symphony, which, by the way, was about my 50th audition, I did many all around the country. I won a few along the way. I won about 10%, actually. So I've won 5 auditions and done the other 45 I didn't win. In fact, I have a TEDx talk about that. I call it my secret resume. It's the iceberg underneath the few that I won at the top.
Right.
It's the TEDx talk is called The Art of Failure, and I talk about my career as an auditioner, which is now long in the past, fortunately. But when I was doing them, I lost my train of thought a little bit.
Well, we were talking about the art of failure.
Yes.
And all the auditions that you didn't win.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So when I was doing my auditions, one of the people that I somehow found to coach with when I was living in New York was a theater coach, someone who worked with actors and worked with them to kind of like a method actor teacher who worked with them on a psychological level. I don't even remember how I found this person, but I did. And he started talking about internal spaces and how do you infuse the music with the emotion that you're feeling when you play it. And for me, that was coming from a completely different space to look at this process.
That doesn't surprise me because in theater they talk about, I think they use the term motivation.
Yeah.
Which is such a great term, you know, really where can you place your attention to really source the authentic kind of flow for this specific character?
Yeah. So that was really the only teacher I had that talked about these kinds of things, but it made a deep impression, and it's something that when I was doing meditation and cultivating these states of being and internal states of compassion and loving kindness and calmness, that reminded me of those ideas, how we can find those places within ourselves and then bring them forward in performance or at an audition, when people don't think about that for an audition, but
right.
that there are some people who just naturally, sometimes you'll hear a soloist perform and they are so in the emotion of the music that it just draws you in immediately. And they know something. They know how to do that. And it's one thing if you're playing a whole concerto, and if that's what you do all the time, you tend to have ways that you could get into those internal emotional spaces. But for most of us who aren't doing that all the time, we're not so much taught about how to get to that place. But of course, that's where we all want to live when we're performing and interacting with our colleagues, and whether it's chamber music or jazz or improvisation, you want to get into that inspirational space. And it absolutely can be cultivated. And for me, doing Vipassana meditation has really been the route to the pathway to finding these places within myself. It's not the only way, for sure, but it's another tool in our toolbox that I certainly have found that it's not such a difficult thing to do for students when they're first starting out. And even when if I give a seminar at a music conservatory and talk about 5 or 10 minutes before your practice time to calm yourself, or if you want to particularly express some emotion, get yourself into this Vipassana meditation, metta mind state and body state. That can make a huge difference right away in how you're able to express yourself.
Loving kindness as a generator of our sounds, our music, our communication.
And our lives in general.
Well, you've given us a lot in this chat, Barbara. Thank you so much for all that you shared with us. Really fantastic to talk to you. And before signing off, I just want to acknowledge, too, our mutual friend, Zella Terry, who we lost last year. I think you shared a stand with her in the New York Philharmonic on a tour or two.
I did. We were both subbing in our early career days in New York.
That's
and
great.
Really got to be very, very close with her. Yeah.
Well, just a moment of tribute to dear Zella, who we both love so much. So thank you again for this conversation, Barbara. I know that we'll stay in touch.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And I don't know if you want people to know that how we got to know each other a bit was during the pandemic, when I was home not working and many people were just home, and I came across your courses online, your crossword arpeggios.
Yes,
and
right.
And I thought, with all this free time, I don't have to play an orchestra. I would love to learn how to do a little improvisation and play in different genres. And I started doing your online courses and learning how to play, so many different things, modal harmonies and playing chordal progressions up and down the cello. And that was a really wonderful silver lining to those difficult, dark days when I was home trying to figure out what I could do to be productive. So thank you for those.
Oh, fantastic.
Classes.
Oh, what a great testimonial. Yeah, definitely. We'll feature that part in this podcast. Well, thanks again, Barbara. Signing off for now.
Thank you so much. Great to see you.
All right. Take care.